Welcome to Pigeon River Farm, doing farming right. I'm Robert Brown, the owner of Pigeon River Farm. Thank you for viewing.
Well, good evening, Bill. It's great to see you back again. I guess you're going to do one on manure pits, I understand. There's a couple farmers in the room here that have such things, so we'll see and learn a lot. Is this going to be a long presentation, short presentation? What's your thoughts?
Probably shorter, but pertinent
Pertinent to that.
for that. To the manure pit person. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
Yep.
Very good. Well, I'll let you get going here, and I'll get out of your way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this presentation is going to be on repurposing abandoned manure pits. I guess in the back of my mind, as a fish farmer, I look at all the people that have water at their disposal, and I just can't resist the urge to help out using it, and I would hate to see it wasted as a resource. So I'm going to just go over some of the considerations, and maybe help you consider repurposing the manure pit for raising fish. Now, my objectives are, I've been probably raising fish for 15, 20 years, and I've only got so much water myself, and the aquaculture industry is critically short of aquatic resources. When I say that is, there's artesians. We know how much water comes out of that every day. There's people that have backyard ponds, but there's not a lot of ability to expand the resources. Someone that go out of business, we kind of lose. So that resource is gone for perpetuity. I don't know. So I started thinking about, well, if I needed to have someone help me with extra water, where could I find that? And just looking around, I see that I can partner with high schools. They always looking for fish. They've got aquaculture programs. There's water there to use. So I can take some of my research ideas and develop in there, and I would hope that they would appreciate the fact that they get fish and ideas for training young kids on water quality and aquaculture in the schools. So there's one source. And then I see these unused manure pits all over the place, and if you're following what's going on in Wisconsin, I don't know how many farms are decommissioned every year, and we lose that, and a certain proportion of them all have manure pits. And theoretically, if a manure pit or a farm is abandoned with a manure pit, they'd like to see those abandoned properly. And to me, a manure pit represents a significant source which has already been engineered way beyond what most of us pond guys can afford to do. So that is a resource that's better than anything I can afford to put together. So why would off the top of your head, why would you waste that resource if it's there? So that's my objective, is to not allow that to happen. So before I started into this, I wanted to make sure I was on the right track. So I researched the regulations to find out if they can be repurposed legally without going through a lot of hoops. I mean, it's one thing to just do it, and another thing to do it from the outside coming in and circumvent rules and regulations. There's a Department of Ag, and there's a DNR, and you can get into a lot of paperwork and a lot of meetings and so forth, which to me, from the outside, I don't want to do. Why would I do that? So I researched and I found the regulations for waste facility closure. There's a lot of updates all the way from 2001. There's 4 or 5 updates, and so it's there. And here's the text of the regulation. I got that on there. I know you can't read it, but it's there. So I'm on the right track. So inside of that, I did pull out a couple of things that allow me to say for sure what we can do. And basically, they're looking at freshwater storage as being legal to do in a properly managed manure pit. And one of the things, or there's several things you can do with it. You can have swimming, you can have fish production, livestock watering, when the water is adequate for that purpose. So that's the black hole, if you will. We have to prove the water's okay to do it. So that's what we're going to do. And so now how would I go ahead and evaluate a manure pit, or what would I recommend? So first of all, I want to look at the variables. What do normal manure pits look like? And I would say they're either clay lined, or they have a synthetic lined, or they're concrete. And again, all of these things are things that basically, if I was going to dig a pit, it wouldn't be this. I would try to find a clay line and leave it at that, but I wouldn't start affording synthetic or concrete or any of this. So there's something that's already way over my capital cost of a normal pond. The difference in a typical fish pond versus a manure pit, from what I've seen, most of the manure pits have very steep sidewalls. And a lot of times you'll see fences around that just for the safety factor. And if you're going to use it for a fish farm or a fish operation, you might taper one side of it just so you can have access to the sidewall, or getting in and out if you're going to, depending upon what you want out of it. But it can be left the way it is. It makes a great pond, but the access is a pretty steep drop off. So you think about that when, if you ever got fish to where you wanted to seine it, it might be unmanageable, too deep, or a lot of work to manage it that way. The volume of these pits is variable, and they could range from a small ones, hundreds of thousands of gallons, up to millions of gallons. Well, that's a pretty good size fish farm. When you start looking at what I do with fish on a very small, these are way bigger than my little quarter-acre fish pond that I use. So there's a lot of water, and a lot of the water comes from runoff and the operation itself, which we would probably terminate and get into something else. The waste that's in these ponds, I've seen a number of ponds. Some of them are two-stage, and the first stage is kind of to collect a lot of the solid waste, and then that overflows into a secondary one, which is much deeper, and it may be aerated or not, but the solid waste one is being filled up with all the animal waste, and it could include bedding and inert material, and that one really should be cleaned out more often, because it fills up fast if there's no control over what's going in. So I've seen both sides of it, and then I've seen single ponds has everything. Some of the ponds are not aerated at all. Some are aerated because they're trying to achieve something. They might want to have the aeration will break up some of the solids and start to digest that down so that there's more liquid manure. So the way they manage the waste depends. So you're going to end up with a different objective and different aerations and not aerated and so forth. So you got a little of everything. Now, when I started looking at the pond, I thought, what if we could start raising fish without doing anything? If we just left everything in the pond and didn't move it around and take it out or make it operate like a manure pit. Let's just say everything's settled down. How would I know what the water is like in there? So what I would do is probably what I do in a normal pond, is take analyses. And in order to do the analysis correctly, I would like to assume a seasonal analysis and a vertical analysis, meaning you want to know what the water is doing at different seasons of the year, because a typical pond would go through a turnover twice a year, at which time there's going to be things moving around in the pond like a lake, just like a lake. And then you want to find out what the vertical profile is. What's everything doing in the middle of winter, in the middle of summer, when the water might be stagnant or when it's active. So you want to know what parameters are good water quality for fish, so that you can kind of plan on what to do. So this is what I normally do for fish. I always want to know what the oxygen is. You want to know what the temperature is, your pH, hardness, alkalinity, and the nitrogen compounds, which include ammonia, nitrates, nitrites. Those are all the types of things that you would normally see in a pond, but more critical probably if you're not taking out the solids in the manure pit, or you're not taking it down. You want to know what is there that would be deleterious to fish and what needs to be taken out. So we did that, and I would say overall the hardness and alkalinity were usually high and consistent seasonably and vertically. So the two parameters I like to watch, I'm going to just give you my personal opinion on hardness and alkalinity. They go together. And the harder the water, I would say the better. When you get softer water, the water is more susceptible to pH swings, and it's not as good for fish. I like, just even in a wastewater treatment plant, I look at pHs between 7 and 8 as being perfect, and if you're going to lean one way, I would go a little toward 8. Obviously, if you know your chemistries and your biological problems, ammonia can be in the water, but as soon as you get over 8 to 8.5, ammonia starts getting toxic to fish, so you don't want to be too high of a pH. But you want to be on the alkaline side. That's perfect. And a little bit of hardness, and you think about it, almost everything that the biology needs is hardness. Fish have got scales, they've got backbones, they got eggshells, and all of this stuff is calcium, and the better the hardness, the better. And when I say better, I say 350 is really good. 300, 400, 500, that's okay. But that's what I call good hardness. So anything below 250, you're starting to want. And alkalinity, same thing. It's they're kind of related. You're looking at carbonate, bicarbonate, alkalinity, and again, the alkalinity wants to be a little above 7, or that's pH. You want your alkalinities higher than 200, let's say, and that's the same with hardness. Like I said, the two are paired, and it's all chemistry how that works. So that's all I want to say about that, and without getting too complicated. But you should be doing these tests all the time, and when you, like I said, there's a sweet spot, and you should know where the sweet spots are, just as a reference. And so oxygen and ammonia fluctuate seasonally. When you have the turnover, both seasonally, spring and fall, that gets everything mixed up good, and your ponds can run pretty good for a while. When the ponds get stagnant, you start building up more ammonia in one place on either side of that, and at the detriment and at the expense of oxygen. So you want to pay attention to how that happens and why and how. So I'll go over that in a little bit. I'll show you what happens in a typical system. What he also found out is, when you think about it, the nutrients are generally soluble. Some of it's are going to go into the bottom, but by and large, these things are going to be soluble phosphorus, soluble nitrogen, and they're all over the place. So if you're pumping it, if you're watching this, you never really lose nutrients because they recycle. So it's always going to be there unless you pump the whole thing out and it's gone. Then you're going to start with low nutrients again, and you'll probably build them up slowly over time. But unless you pump it down, you don't lose them. They're there in one form or another. They might get cycled into an algae or something, or into a fish, but then in the waste it comes right back. So that all becomes soluble and available. So that's why when you get swings in temperature, all of a sudden you get a bloom of something you weren't expecting, and boing. And I'll show you how that works in a couple slides here. Okay, I'm just gonna step back and say this is a broad, picture of I'm taking a lot of liberties here. So let's say you've got your fish in the pond, or even in an indoor system. This is pretty typical of what to expect. You've got your fish, and a lot of the fish breathe right out of the gills, and a lot of soluble waste comes out of the gills, and the rest of it comes out as a solid. Now, if you aerate the solids become dissolved, and so all of that stuff goes over into this box over here. Now what you've got is, let's just call it liquid waste. So in a manure pit, that's what we have. We've got a ton of liquid waste, most of which end up as ammonia, and in order to convert ammonia, we need to aerate, and you'll see that the ammonia is converted from ammonia to nitrates. Nitrates are not healthy for fish, so we want to keep converting the nitrates. But you see what we've done already is we've taken the NH3, which is ammonia, and we've already added the O2 on, and there's where some of your oxygen goes. So we got to keep aerating some more, and the more you aerate, the more oxygen you add to this waste. And now you've taken the nitrites and made nitrates. Nitrates are tolerable to fish. But in both of these steps, you need your bacteria, which are your nitrogen converting bacteria. They convert this ammonia to nitrites and then to nitrates, so that those are two steps that suck up all the oxygen in your manure pit. And then or in your fish tank too, for that matter. This is what's going on. So you've aerated. Now you've got all this waste, or this clean water, coming back to the fish. And what I like to say is that aeration is actually, by this time it's re-aeration. So you're putting air back into the system. This aeration is sucking up all the oxygen for bug serve as the satisfying the conversion, and this is the oxygen you need to go back into the fish. Now re-aeration can occur through aerating manually or surface re-aeration. A lot of times, depending upon how cold the water is, you can get oxygen pulled out of the air and into the water. The warmer the water, the less oxygen it can hold. So cold water will hold about 14 parts per million oxygen, and when you get up into the 70s, maybe down to 8 parts per million or less, and the more biology that's going on in here will keep taking more out. Now, the other thing that you should remember is that at night, this is all going on, and all the plants in your system that were producing oxygen all day long from photosynthesis, they're doing directly the opposite. They're sucking up oxygen too at night. So everybody in the pond, there's nobody left to produce oxygen at night. So if you wanted to test in your tank or in your pond, the best time to test the worst condition for oxygen would be about 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning before the sun comes up. And that would tell you if you're even in the ballpark with respect to oxygen. So you always satisfy oxygen for the worst time of the day. So find out when there's a deficiency and whether or not that deficiency warrants counteraction. That's what I would do. So at night, everything eats oxygen. Daytime, you got your primary producers giving you oxygen. So that combats some of this, what your need is. And that actually provides reaeration too. So that's a real quick synopsis of what's going on, whether it's in your pond or in a tank inside your house or a fish farm, indoor facility. Yeah. Now, let's show you a cutaway view of what's going on. On this one, this is a winter profile. So in a winter, we assume that there's going to be ice forming on here, but maybe, let's say for now, there's open water where you can get reaeration. But basically, the water quiets down. Now, another important aspect about the manure pit, which is not the same as a pond, is the steep sidewalls. Now, I've got some ponds that are wide open, like a 3-acre and shallow, like Lake Winnebago. But on the manure pit, you've got it much deeper. So the ability of the air to go across this and turn this all the way around is very limited. So in the wintertime, this is a perfect example of what's going to happen. It stops. The wind stops. The ice is going to cover. This water is going to get thick here. And everything that's in the pond that was floating around and dissolved is going to go down to the bottom. And you're going to end up with a sludge zone. Now this is immaterial of all the stuff, the manure and stuff that's already in there. But let's assume that the sludge is from the animals and whatnot that you've put in there. Now you've got a definite anaerobic zone, and it may be solid, it may be semi-solid, and more solid as the deeper it is. But on top of that, as this closes off, all this stuff goes down to the bottom, and so your anaerobic zone is definitely down here, and your oxygen zone at turnover. Now I'm assuming that this, let's just say this turns over, but it may not. But at turnover, everything above this anaerobic zone becomes oxygenated. You got the reaeration, you got all this being turned over. So this is the most oxygen you're going to have without mechanical aeration. So in the wintertime, this zone, as this closes off, this zone gets bigger and bigger because it's using up more oxygen, although it's slower because all this mechanism slows down with cold temperatures. And while this is happening, you're getting a little bit more ammonia. So we don't know where this is going to end unless you do a seasonal profile. You don't know if this water is any good for fish at all. So whether I keep fish in here or I pump some of this water into the barn for reuse, we don't know if there's any oxygen right now. Right? That's the winter profile. So let's go to the summer profile. So you've got the same anaerobic zone down here, but now we just got through spring, opened up the water, and now we might have the spring turnover if we got it windy enough or if we're aerating. Now we have more oxygen at the beginning of spring, let's say April through June. I found out it not too bad. But as algae grows because of the temperature, we got these soluble nutrients all over the place. As the algae, they want to do a bloom. And where that bloom sets up may end up as a blanket which is completely dark below it. If it's completely dark below it, that means, let's say this is the line of the algae bloom, that means you've got everything above that. The algae is producing super oxygen here, in this oxygen zone, and everything below that is anaerobic. That's what's going to happen in this pond. So, and that kind of bears out. Now, it doesn't happen right away. You can go a long time into summer, depending upon how strong this wind is that affects this pond. You can keep driving this zone down a little bit, but eventually, whether it's the dog days of August or July, this quits mixing, and you get superheat up here, and a algae blanket. So the summer profile is a little different than the winter, and we still can use the water in this thing for a while, but eventually you may not be able to. So, what are the findings? They said without cleaning the sludge out and no aeration, oxygen to sustain fish can't be achieved through June. So I did have good oxygen on the area where the intake was until about the end of June, and then the re-aeration just stops, and you don't get you get that blanket set up. Dissolved nutrients are generally always going to be somewhere in that pond, and eventually they're going to create, after the spring or the fall turnover, they're going to create a bloom somewhere. And, maybe 1 out of every 3 years you can avoid it, but you're just going to take a chance all the time. The depth of the bloom is restricted to the light penetration. So, and that may set up anywhere, depending upon, there's going to be a temperature gradient right at that bloom. And the one issue is not the temperature so much as the ammonia. And you can find it very easily, yeah. And on top of that, we found that the temperature, because the light penetration, that algae bloom, if it's 2-3 feet below the surface, it's generating a lot of heat. So now you've got a situation where if there's re-aeration, it's only going to be in the top 2-3 feet of the water, and that water is going to get warm, excessively warm for culture of fish. And because it's warmer, it won't hold the oxygen, and now we've got problems with day and night. It's diurnal fluctuations is what you're going to have super saturation during the day and super deficient at night because of this diurnal fluctuation of where the oxygen goes. Yeah. So the bottom line is I'm not recommending using manure pits without taking that sludge layer out. I mean, and maybe that's obvious, but now I'm giving you the reasons why. I mean, I hope it wasn't so obvious that it sounds stupid, but I always make sure I've got the answers before. And I did enough testing, like I said. I did testing seasonally and vertically so that I know what's going on where in your pond, so you can make some educated decisions and judgments on what to do. So what do we got? So once we get this all cleaned out, and I've got at least one, maybe two ponds that I've been working with where we clean it all out. Now you can't always clean everything out, but you can get 90-some% out that the solubles are still, there's a couple things floating around. But anyway, I want to talk about what are your options. Now you got a manure pit. Now this could be for a farm that's existing, and you've got to abandon the manure pit, or you've gotten rid of the livestock. And I know that there's a number of people that have, young couples, for instance, have bought farms that all there was the buildings and the manure pit, so to speak, and they buy this and might want to make a hobby farm, but they don't know what to do with the manure pit. And technically, the first thing that the agencies want to do is to see you abandon that manure pit properly. Well, we're going to do something else. We're going to do some kind of aquaculture. And one of the things that, I'm a fish farmer, so I don't talk about too much is hydroponics. Now, hydroponics is actually growing plants, and it does no fish involved at all. And when you get into aquaponics, then you're talking about fish and plants. But this one is hydroponics. Now, you might think, how in the world is this possible? Well, if you've already got the barn next to the manure pit, which is quite a bit the common thing, all you do is refill the manure pit once it's cleaned out, and you got all that water that you can pump back into the barn, and then you can have tanks or channels or rafts or all kinds of different construction for hydroponics, and just for raising greens or microgreens, all kinds of, just a water source. And some of it you might still have some of the nutrients. I don't even know how much of the nutrients are completely gone from that, but you might have a source for eating up the nutrients that are still around. And that might have been able to be done without dropping it down. So hydroponics might be an option, a cheap option for using all the water in a manure pit for nothing else. So that's one. But then, if you want to go into fish culture, I've got a whole bunch of different options, whether it's fry culture, feed train, cold banking, grow out, market. Now, I'm not sure. All right. Let's talk about each one of these. Fish culture, if you had a manure pit and it was completely full of water without any fish in it, you could actually put in fish that would be considered brood stock. So brood stock would allow you to get your own eggs and start fish culture, fry culture. And what I would do with that would be, you can leave them in the pond. Obviously, you're going to get a population of fish that you're going to have to manage. The one thing that's a problem with that is the steep slopes of the pond might discourage you from actively working it with seines and so forth. But if you were going to do fry culture, you could easily get the eggs that are laid along the bank. You can pull them out and put them indoors, and you can do a hatching system, feed training, fry culture in the barn, and I'll show you some pictures later on about that. That's fry culture. So all of that can be done in the barn next to and using that manure pit as a water source for accomplishing all the stuff that goes on in the barn. And once you get that accomplished, the fry culture, now we're talking about free trading fry and juvenile grow out. I have low tanks that I use, and for all of this, and I can raise my perch up to about 4 inches in all these low tanks that I got in the barn. And then there's another thing, this has not been discussed in circles hardly at all, and that's cold banking. And this is would be a wonderful thing to do in the barn, because that doesn't require you to heat the barn. You can use water from the manure pit all winter long. That's going to be in the 30 degrees. You can just run water in, right back out into the manure pit without, other than a pump expense. But that's cold banking. And cold banking means that you're holding fish indoors in the barn, almost like they were outside in the manure pit, except that now you have access to them. So if you wanted to warm up the water and start growing them out so that they start eating, or if you want to sell them to other people who have indoor systems, you've got what we call a bank of fish that you're holding for that purpose. So this would be very new to the industry, because technically there aren't that many people that have indoor systems, but this is what has to happen if you want an industry. So if the industry is actually moving along, you're going to be the first guy with fish that are available in the off season that you can sell. So these are premium fish. And I would, this is not for stocking. This is for grow out. It's a totally different animal. Stocking fish can be done any time of the year that you have access, but most people would never, these are all feed trained fingerlings, and they're ideally suited for grow out for table food. And then here's the grow out market. This is, again, here I'm using a low profile tank, maybe 30 inches high. This one I'm using 50 some inches for the grow out market. And I might have pictures of both. And then of course, stocking. So if you had no idea what to do with an abandoned manure pit, these are all the options that I think are available right now for you to get into business. So, and right now, probably the best one, because people aren't ready for all of these, the best one is stocking. The second one is the grow out market, because demand for perch. A couple of years ago, the demand went to about $25 a pound. Now it's back down to about 15, and a lot of it has to do with what's going on in Lake Michigan, Lake Erie. For all practical purposes, it's not Lake Michigan anymore because that market is way down. Green Bay is pretty good. It's cyclic. But Lake Erie has had their problems. So a couple of years ago, Lake Erie couldn't deliver any fish, so the price went up to about $25 a pound. That would be the time when you want to be in this market. And to satisfy this market, you're going to need these three things to do it year round. So these are the things that I'm promoting to people that want to know what to do with. And besides all of that, you can always just use it for fishing. So, and you know, the grandkids come over and whatnot. So these are production-based options, and then there's the aesthetics and the relaxation one too. So, all right. So now I want to show you a couple of pictures. One, this is a picture of an operation that we're testing out. These are low-profile tanks. They're only, I think these are 30 inches top to bottom, and I use them for hatching eggs and feed training fish and all the grading fish, vaccinations if you want. We do vaccinate perch. We've got that developed. Not too many people know about it. And then I can raise fish all the way up to about 4 inches, and at that time I'd like to get them in a taller tank. But this is, you can see, this is a typical barn. You put it up on block, just so you get underground, under tank plumbing, overflows, and then right into the trench. It's already there. So you got all this plumbing, you just got to get a line bringing it back in. And that might be the same line. You might, you know. Now this is another one that we done. This is nothing more than a swimming pool, but we were cold banking, testing out whether or not it works. Here we have about a 3,500 3-inch, 4-inch fish, and we can easily go to 10,000 fish in here. And all we're doing is pumping pond water over winter from the manure pit into here. You can see the intake right here. We have to monitor the air to make sure we have air, but if we're aerating just a little bit, we've got super cold water. And all we're doing is holding these fish in suspended animation, and we're feeding maybe every 3 days, just a maintenance diet, and cleaning up any solids that are, you know, vacuuming it out, and that's it. And again, we can set this up right along the old barn trench, and just take that and run it over and be done. So if you're doing well water, you want to be careful about, you want to make sure there's oxygen in. Sometimes well water is not, and you want to make sure there's no nitrogen. A lot of the wells got a lot of nitrogen in. So you want to aerate it, pre-aerate it, before you put it in. Well water is going to be about 50 degrees. This water is going to be about 35 maybe. Yeah, so big difference. So there's a 15-degree difference. So these guys might eat a little more than from the manure pit water. Same principle though. You're just cold banking them. One thing I didn't say in any of my seminars, perch need, in order to develop eggs, they need 50-degree temperature or lower for 90 days minimum. And you'll see, if you go out fishing, you'll see all of a sudden you'll see perch with eggs in August, September, October. Those are next year's eggs. So they're already putting them on. So when fish are eating in the fall, they're feeding the egg mass, not necessarily the body mass. So, so we're right here, we're at 50 degrees, 52 degrees for well water. So if there's that, they're never gonna develop eggs. And in all reality, the young fish aren't going to be mature enough to do any spawning or anything the first year. So we can have them, if we grew them out, they would be right at producing eggs. Some of the females that from the year before could produce eggs, they may not be viable 1 year old or less. And that's kind of where we're at. These fish are only 3 inches or 4 inches because we got them in cold water and they're suspended. All right, so that's 2 options. Now, for shallow ponds, let's say for shallow ponds, if your manure pit was deep, there's no reason, if you wanted to spawn fish out there, there's no reason to flood it all the way up. You can keep the water low, and it'll be warmer faster. So your egg development would occur faster, the fish would hatch faster, and then when all that's occurred, then bring the water up with runoff or whatever, up to you can keep filling it up, because now the fish need more water. They want it cooler. They don't want it that warm. You want more water with more oxygen, and so forth. The only 2 things that I've seen that bother me on fry culture in a pond, and I've seen both of these things. One is dragonflies. The dragonfly nymphs eat perch. I don't know if you've ever seen these little the nymphs. They're called when they emerge, they got this casing that's left on the shore. That's an exuviae. Well, that bug lives in the water, and some are more aggressive than others. The damsels aren't as bad because they're smaller, but these guys with they've got these articulating arms, and they got claws on the end of them, and they go out and grab these little fry that are only 1 inch, and they eat them. They just bring them right to their mouth, and I've seen it where I've had nets where I'm trapping the fry, so I take out 1,000 fish at a time. The whole thing would be littered, and the next morning by the dragonflies coming in the trap and eating the fry. That's one bug that I know is damaging to the small fish. The second one that I don't have proof, but we were seining a manure pit, and if I was gonna start up a manure pit, I would start by the first year putting in fathead minnows. I like fathead minnows the best because they mind their own business. But fathead minnows, you got to have something in there, because if you don't have anything, the bugs that fly in are going to proliferate, because there's so much. There's going to be nutrients and whatnot, and these things are eating algae and all kinds. But the true bugs are predatory, and there's one called the nodonectid. And I seined the pond looking for perch fry, and all I got was a net solid nodonectids. I mean, now A notonectid is a true bug, and it's got a piercing mouthpiece that folds under its head, and it goes in there and pokes and sucks the liquids out of the fish. And there is no way, there's no way for the fish to survive that. So I mean, you could almost walk across them, they're so thick. So what I would do is have a forage fish in there that eats bugs. Now bluegills can do that, but you don't want something getting big if you want a monoculture. And fathead minnows are going to be small, and the perch can eat them if they want to, if you want them to. All right, you need something in there eating all these bugs. And fathead minnows would proliferate to the point where they could do the job. So that's the only thing I saw in a manure pit that I wasn't comfortable with. So, for what it's worth. And that would occur more in a shallow pond than a deep pond. So in a shallow pond, you can use it for fry culture and first year grow out, and that's all but in a deeper pond, I would use, and that's greater than 8 feet, I would use it for broodstock culture, pond cytane culture, which is where you're going to get your water into the barn or next to it, and cold banking. That all makes sense, I think. Yeah. So, this is one that I set up. This is a pretty good sized manure pit. It did have duckweed on it. This is actually the one where I saw all the notonectids, but this is after. This is before we cleaned it. And this, I could run this right into the middle of July before the heat and the ammonia would prevent me from finishing off the fish. So that tells me that we got to clean it out. And after I cleaned it out, it was very shallow water, and we had that notonectid problem. So again, if you're going to bring the water back and start it out, I would put in a bait fish to keep the clean. And the bait fish can only, they're going to eat bugs and algae, and if they don't have anything to eat, they won't produce. And these fish, the fathead minnows, are just the right size for even small perch to feed on. So this is an example of a dock, and again, you don't have to put the dock out very far because it drops right down, and your intake is about 2-3 feet below. You always want your intake several feet below because the surface gets warm. You want it down low enough so that it's not too hot. And you bring it in. I got a pump here, and that just goes into this tank. And then all the other pictures that I showed of what a tank looks like. This one, again, this is a test example, and we could add more. This pump can handle 6 or more tanks, so you can keep proliferating that without any problem. The waste from here you can take and treat over off the backside, and the water run back in. So it's a recirculation system. That's all so I wanted to show you how simple it is. Just this here, the dock, the pump, the piping, all of this, less than $3,000. So for a small family, this tank will produce 240 pounds of fish, certainly enough for you and everybody around you. I mean, that's a source of income and I like to think that CSAs can do this. So if you're doing produce and you've got a small pond, you certainly could add fish to the mix. Obviously, the fish may not be available until September or late August, September, but then you've got that in substitute from the early greens, let's say. So a CSA is a perfect complement to what's going on, and it might be the only source of protein that you get in your basket. Yeah. So that's pretty much it, and I hope the manure people that have resources can see something in here that trips our trigger a little bit, and certainly contact me for more questions on how this is done if you got questions on it. But it's a resource, and to me, I just hate to waste the resource.
Well, Bill, I thank you very much, and I concur 100% with you. I'm a big one on repurposing. And what an environmental, economic shame that all these manure pits are being first built and then destroyed, and they're an economic viable source for income for the farmers who often are struggling, especially in the older farms that if that's an abandoned manure pit, hence the words it's abandoned. So there's obviously some dynamics to that. Well, anyways, I want to thank you so very much. Everybody tonight, it's pretty snowy and cold out there, so make sure on your drive home you're very safe. So I thank you one and all.
Thank you.